Okay, very welcome here to Timbro in Stockholm. We are going to have a seminar around education questions related to the Swedish school system. This seminar is also broadcasted on Timbro's web and also on YouTube, so everything you say will be heard by a lot of people, we hope for. I'm Björn Hasselgren. I'm senior fellow here at Timbro in Stockholm. I'm also active at KTH Royal Institute of Technology. Most of the time I don't spend in questions related to the education system, but I'm very interested also in these issues. It's a great honor to have a very distinguished panel today and a very distinguished prime presenter. Mr. Daniel Klein comes from George Mason University in the US and also active at the Ratio Institute here in Stockholm. He will be giving a presentation around some reflections as a parent, having a daughter going to the Swedish school system, and as an American looking from abroad a bit and reflecting on the Swedish school system. Dan is specialized as a professor in economics in Adam Smith. One of his main key areas is very well, he knows all of these issues very well, so I think perhaps we will hear some of reflections also to this material. Then two commentators, Professor Emerita Inger Enkvist from Lund University, and you are active in the field of Spanish studies and Latin American literature, and very distinguished. I looked into your list of publications, and I found publications in that list back to the 1980s, reflecting on the education system on different levels in the Swedish system and also foreign systems. So you have a lot of reflections on that. And I especially saw your under the headline, Other Tasks and Qualifications. I was very impressed seeing that you are a member of the Academy de las Ciencias Políticas y Morales in Argentina. I think that must be very distinguished to be part of that. So very good to see you here. Our other commentator is Mr. Robert Clark. You are active as principal at Engelska skolan in Enskede. And Robert has a background for some 40 years working in the UK, in the British school system, and also for some 10 years in Sweden in different schools, and has got the experience of comparing privately run schools compared to the public sector schools in Sweden and in the UK. And you have also been a part of a panel at Sveriges kommuner och landsting looking into education questions, and I heard you had some interesting experiences from that work. So we are looking forward to your comments following Dan's presentation. And after that we will also open for questions from the audience. We have an hour to go, so I suggest that we kick off with Dan and let you two wait for the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bjorn. Good morning, everyone. That's my daughter. I'm speaking today as a parent, really two other parents who have children in the Swedish school system. As a parent, I've noticed a pattern in my daughter's classwork and schoolwork, sort of about a lot of worrying about certain particular effects, particularly perhaps in ecological matters, worry about these effects, and a sort of urge for greater concern coming time and again. I feel that the pattern plays particularly to the attitudes of the political left, and that students, my daughter, gets the impression of teachers as a sort of core of worriers who are presenting a kind of official public attitude about issues and about how to strike certain postures and attitudes on public issues. The official worries dwell especially on environmental issues, running out of things, commons problems like global warming and ocean acidification, Some poverty issues. Democracy and democratic are often used as sort of synonymous with goodness. And they're everywhere in the curriculum. It's not just in the social studies. They turn up even in the word problems in math. They're particularly prominent in the sciences, technology, and so on. And I feel, just as a parent, that my daughter is kind of engulfed. That's maybe a little bit dramatic, but fairly true, in these sort of official worries, as I'm calling them, and that she and other students are sort of trained into certain postures and attitudes, getting a sense of what is politically correct. So they're sort of being almost trained in political correctness, or PC. One concrete example, I could give many, but like she did a paper on bridges, and 41% had to do with different building materials that could be used in building bridges, and then the environmental impacts of those different materials. Just a great deal of, again, attention paid time and again to the sort of same issues. Last week, she told me they saw a documentary about plastics are bad for the environment. Now, this is not to deny or suggest that we shouldn't worry about real social problems and that social issues shouldn't be treated in the classwork. There are things, though, that I would hope students are told, that life is complex, that you really need to have understandings of how social life works, and in fact that understandings are multiple and that people disagree about them. Even experts disagree about them. And I think it'd be very good for students to hear that rather than get the sense that, officials and experts come up with the official understanding which they are to receive. As an economist, I'm particularly big on economic ideas about prices, profit and loss, competition, all that good stuff, how coordination happens through bottom-up decision-making, decentralized decision-making. How does Stockholm get fed? For the most part, it's through these sort of bottom-up decisions. Spontaneous order is a word that's associated with that idea of coordination coming from the bottom up, the invisible hand. Trade-offs are important. Students should know that you always face trade-offs. There's no magic bullets. Knowledge problems are very important. Once you get beyond your own personal or local affairs, you actually know very little about the things you're trying to affect. An important idea is that intentions are one thing and consequences and results are another. And in a complex world, they often do not go together. You can say you intend to do something, but you get very different consequences. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And, you need the understandings to get a sense of what are the most important things. Students are just presented with certain things as important to dwell on and worry about, but how is that importance arrived at? You need understandings, and I feel that, frankly, a lot of the official worries are not that important. That a lot of time is being spent on things that are less important than a lot of other things students could be learning. These public issues, environmental issues, are public policy issues to a great extent. They're about government rules for society. And we would hope that people who talk about those issues have some training in public policy, in understanding public policy. We would want people perhaps with training in political science, in political economy, in economics. And you have to ask, do teachers actually have much background or expertise in that? And I think the answer is often no. To talk a little bit about the teachers, certification is supposed to be followed, and most of the teachers are certified now. The certification is coupled with going to the teaching programs, and several sources have told me that they are very predominantly left in the faculty. I know a young woman, she's the daughter of a good friend of ours, who is becoming a teacher, and she is not on the left. And she tells me about her experience and what she says with her peers. So she and other sources assure me that, in fact, these programs are quite predominantly on the left. And I want you to think a little bit about that situation, about selection effects. Suppose a young woman is thinking of becoming a teacher and she's not on the left, but she knows that the programs are quite on the left, and that going through these programs is going to require a lot of engagement and dealing with the leftist outlook. She can anticipate that she will not enjoy the program, the years through the courses to become a teacher. She might be disfavored if people know that she doesn't really agree, or if she voices her disagreement. And she might expect that she's going to have to conform to the official view, the dominant view. And anticipating all that, she might figure, I won't become a teacher. I don't enter. She selects herself out of the teaching pool. And so when we have these effects, we can easily get uniformity in the profession, both of the students who go to these programs as well as in the faculty who run these programs. They select other people to join them, and they too discriminate against people who ideologically oppose them. This is a common phenomenon in academia, and it creates a problem of groupthink, where people are hanging around or surrounded with people who think like them. They don't hear opposing views, their ideas are not tested and challenged, and they just go on kind of with their formulas. They create false stereotypes of what the other side thinks or would say. And it's a serious problem, I feel, in many areas of government and academia. Let me turn quickly to the national curriculum. This is this 264-page document, English language version. And I looked how many times certain words appear. All those words, which I think can be quite important to understanding how society works, appear 0 times. Liberty 1, in the age of liberty. Market 1, innovation 1, entrepreneurship 2, industrial 4, price 8, trade 9, sustainability 24, sustainable development 57, ecological 44, and environment or environmental 197. So that's maybe a capsule summary of the emphasis. And I see how these topics and concerns are written into the criteria for my daughter's homeworks. Oh, you didn't say enough, you didn't regurgitate enough about the environment, so you get a B, not an A. Sustainability is used a lot, and you know, this is generally also in US academia, it's a buzzword that's popular there as well. In general, I don't think that people really explain what it is exactly to be sustained and why we should presuppose that that thing in particular should be sustained, what the costs or trade-offs of sustaining it are. These questions to make this idea of sustainability really meaningful are generally not seriously addressed. And again, I think what you get are mere postures and attitudes, buzzwords. My daughter's attitude is I just tell them what they want to hear. I haven't turned her into a gladiator or anything. And she reports that generally students just tell teachers what they want to hear, or they believe what the teacher says because the teacher says it, and that there's really no critical thinking. Again, I think critical thinking could even be punished, questioning and so on. I think all of this arrangement can disserve the children. It could spoil their attitude toward learning. It could spoil their regard for their teachers, their regard for occupational competence and craftsmanship. That is to say, they see their teachers working hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and sort of all of this political posturing and so on getting into their performance in their job of teaching. And it could spoil their attitude towards public discourse, where they're kind of accustomed that to the experience that when you talk about public issues, it's just posturing, it's just attitudes and buzzwords, political correctness, and so they just kind of figure that none of that really makes any sense. Now, there's other stuff that students could be hearing and learning. These are some of the things that I would dwell on, perhaps, if it were my responsibility. I just wanted to show this to show that there is an opportunity cost to all of this time that gets spent on the official worries. Now, parents, you want your child to get good grades. We're all very anxious about this. We want our 8th graders to get into good, or 9th graders to get into good gymnasiums. We want them to go on and get into good colleges, to get good jobs, and so on. But we also want them to gain knowledge, to gain understanding, to develop character. And the great concern here is that getting good grades could, to some extent, actually conflict with these other 3 substantial things. Because if students are actually questioning and challenging their teachers, it might upset their getting good grades. If they think their own way, they might, in a way, be punished for it. So my advice is first to talk to your child about school, about all of these issues, about even the idea of political bias, political groupthink in the school system, and to expose your child to other viewpoints, particularly on the official worries, the topics that they dwell on so much. I think it'd be great if a group like Timbro or some other created a website that provided materials just for this purpose. I imagine that there could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of parents in Sweden who do feel dissatisfaction with the schools in this way. And they might just come to a website which presents videos, discussions, articles pitched at students, at parents, on these very topics that get so much attention in the curriculum. I'm sure there's a great deal of material out there, but I've asked, and there doesn't seem to be a website oriented to just this function. So this is a way for students to do something themselves as parents in their responsibility of bringing up their child. It's not about lobbying Parliament and trying to get the national curriculum changed or the certification requirement changed or the teaching programs changed. It's what you can do at home, where you actually have control over something. Thank you for your attention.
Perhaps we could take some few questions to start with. Thank you, Dan. I'm devastated. It's terrible to listen to you because you are so right. A reflection I have is that when I went to the Swedish school system, I think I started out in '69 or so. I think if you changed all these buzzwords, sustainability and environment, to more criticism of the capitalist system, I think that would be a good proxy for what I learned in school, that capitalists are bad, markets are bad, prices are bad, industry is bad, and then the environment has to be protected. So things change. One thing you might dwell on and think about is this some kind of Swedish conscience or idea of what a society and living in a country like Sweden is? Is it reflected in this curricula, perhaps? Is it that nature, sustainability, environment, and all of this is very a basic idea in Swedish culture? Could it be possible, or?
My sense of it is, I know it's a little bit about Sweden and some about the United States. I'm not very worldly, really. But my sense of it is that the richer countries go to the environment as the thing that we are collectively together to take care of. That's kind of like our collective mission. I'm not sure, I think it's much more prominent in rich countries. But among rich countries, I think I see it so strongly in the United States, so I don't think it's that special to Sweden.
No. Sometimes I reflect on, when I hear these things, that it's about that Astrid Lindgren has really won the debate. We have the young generations, including myself perhaps, have been looking to all of these videos, reading all of this book about Emily Lönneberga, Pippi Longstocking and everything, and this is more or less the thing that she's writing about. You should be nice to each other, you should care for the environment and everything.
There's a lot of individualism in
Yes, of
in
course.
Astrid
Yes,
Lindgren,
yes,
however.
I agree.
I don't, yeah.
I agree.
She saved Sweden.
One last question before we let the others to comment is, of course, you start to think about what should you do then, because I think you have great ideas on how you should have a more reflective curricula or shaping people that are reflecting more genuinely on different questions in life. How do you get there? Should you have some kind of other training for teachers, or what is it what does it take to come close to what you would like to see?
Well, from the top, the national government level, I mean, I think decontrolling the common kind of classical liberal advice makes sense. And so thinning out the national curriculum, perhaps, leaving more autonomy, not requiring certification of teachers, relying more on that bottom-up decentralized process of letting parents choose and letting schools choose who will be a good teacher. I think the human talent for good teaching is enormous, and to confine it to people with those certificates is crazy, absolutely crazy. It's really protecting and serving a very particular interest group, and in a way it's extremely greedy of them and of others who want to protect them and who are not prepared to stand up against them. So at the national level, I think just basic decontrol is the way to go, at whatever levels, whatever degrees, that direction. And again, getting down to, well, gee, what can you do as a parent? I think there's a lot you can do, you know, because we still do have a lot of sovereignty in our home. And like I say, you know, just parents, I hope, are aware of this and are concerned about it. And if they are, there's really a lot I think they can do. The resources, the web and technology is so powerful, so it empowers us individually that way to hear the other view, so different than when we were in school.
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, if we ask Robert and Inger to get up and to start to really criticize Dan, since we are a criticizing community here. Inger.
Yes, please.
Please.
I'll take up the word groupthink, that I think is very important in your presentation. And I want to reflect on groupthink in teacher training and in schools. So groupthink on two levels. And of course, I associate the word groupthink with Orwell. There are some traits in Swedish schools that could be associated to Orwell. And if you permit me, I will speak 2 or 3 minutes about a project I'm just finishing, because it explains what has happened afterwards. I've just finished a manuscript for a book on Swedish school reforms between the 1960s, the 1950s and the 1980s. So I've read all the Swedish school reforms, the laws and the curricula. And I can see that from the 50s onward, the buzzwords, to use Dan's word here, is social equality. Less teacher authority, no exam, group work, finding their own information. The word care is more important than knowledge. Knowledge almost disappears from the official texts. So, and then in the 70s, the word inclusion becomes very important, and the words like solidarity. So when we started the new type of teacher training with the first teacher training institute in Stockholm in '56, it was with the purpose of giving a platform to the kind of pedagogy that we see today and that Dan is speaking about. So we have half a century of this policy. and it just so it's not it's explicit policy. It's not an accident. This is design. So they want the teacher to be a social worker, and not really to transmit cultural values or intellectual values. It's social training, it's social work. And this has the effect that those who do not want teaching to be social work, they tend to avoid the teaching profession because of their time spent on training, and also the kind of environment they will have in schools later on. They think about the teacher lounge during all those years. So they avoid it because there's no alternative. Some other countries have different kinds of school systems, and a teacher could think, I'm preparing to work in that kind of schools, so you can have more diversity. But Sweden has only had one kind of school up to recently. So people who did not want to go into that direction, they avoided the profession. I think you have got that very, very correctly. So it's a kind of groupthink at teacher training level, which is of course very worrying, because if teacher training is to be a university activity, if it's to be intellectual, it should not foster groupthink, but really analytical thinking. So there's something fundamentally wrong with a kind of training that is presented as intellectual, but is really groupthink. Of course, it's then doubly worrying when these teachers trained in groupthink in their classroom continue to teach what they have been taught, and teach the children to think that same way, and then they grade the children on what they have learned about what they should think. This is really very worrying, because it's the opposite of what schools are supposed to be. And you do not really teach so much the facts that could permit you to draw the conclusion. You teach what you think is the conclusion as a kind of shortcut. It's presented like a kind of shortcut. You need not learn so much physics or chemistry, etc. You go to the shortcut. This is what you should worry about. And that is not an intellectual way of doing things. And we are not training young people to be future scientists or be future intellectuals. We are training them to conform to something they have already heard. And this is not what school was supposed to be, ideally. It's of course what school has been in many countries and in other ages, etc. But it's not really an intellectual way of looking at it.
Just a question there. Could you see, when you are working in other countries, and you are working a lot in Latin America and in Spain and so, can you see a different standpoint there on the education system and curricula? Do they view it in a different way, or can we learn something there?
Yes and no. There are everywhere people or parents are looking for schools that work, schools that give lessons, that teach students something, etc. And the school system in Latin America, for example, are having so much trouble teaching that many parents put their children into free schools, what we will say, or private schools, in order to give them lessons, in order that they have all the lessons they have a right to get. Because state schools have so many strikes, and there are such a lot of trouble, they really don't teach. But we have a problem here. So I'll just end up saying that I think an important part of Dan's presentation was the slide on how school spoils children, really. It spoils their respect for learning, for teachers, for schools, for intellectual professions. That is a very hard point to admit, that school does not really teach positive things, that school could teach negative attitudes. It could be harmful. It could be harmful. I think we tend to resist that kind of knowledge. That's my point of view here.
Okay, thank you. Robert, your comments.
Well, yes.
You have a lot of documents there. It seems worrying.
This is the OECD report, actually. I'm sure we've all read it.
Of course.
But I do recommend page 37 if anybody ever wants to read something of it. One of the things it refers to is this tendency to focus on equality within the schools. And the comment within the OECD report, of course, is that with the best intentions in the world, wanting for all people to have equal opportunity, we have a tendency to get equal output or equal endings, when really what was intended was that everyone would be able to reach the maximum of their own potential, whatever that was. And so I was recently, or have recently been part of the expertgrupp, and that was their quote, not mine, which was a shadow organization put together by SKL and Friskolenes Riksförbund to look at ways of helping and developing and improving the Swedish educational system, both short and long term, and giving some input to the actual school commission that has been put together that's working at the present time. This report came out yesterday, I believe. During that process, I experienced much of that which we've been talking about today. There was a groupthink, I felt, and I was not part of it, to the extent that toward the end I expressed a need to make something called a särskilt yttrande, which I did, and that has been included in the report, point 2, page 56, by Ms. Nielfors. And of course, I was fully comfortable with the idea that people would not agree with me. I have an international background. I see things in perhaps a slightly different way, having experienced different things in my working career, both in the UK, in private fee-paying international schools, and within the Swedish state school system, and now as principal of a free school for the last 10 years. Of course, I have a different background and will perceive things differently. What surprised me was, however, the reaction of those people within the group to the fact that I did not agree with them. To the extent that I was actually asked, did I really want to continue within the group? Because everybody else was more or less of the same opinion and felt that this was the way to go, and I didn't. I replied that I really needed to stay within the group because I felt that it was even more important for me to be there, because then they could explain to me the error of my ways. I am a little bit concerned about many of the things that have been mentioned today, because I recognize them myself, having gone from a fee-paying private international school with international children in it to a Swedish state school where I worked for 2 years as a teacher and part of the leadership group there. And I experienced many of the kinds of things within the curriculum which I felt were prescriptive. And also the national test system, which controlled very much that which was going on in the classrooms. And the national focus on making sure that the national test results and the end of school grades were on a par with one another, and where questions were asked if this were not the case. This meant that teachers were under great pressure to ensure that the students were prepared for the national tests. And in order to do that, you had to look at the previous questions and the type of questions that were going to be asked. And therefore, in all fairness, prepare the children for these national tests. At my school, I brought something in called IGCSE. It's something in a cooperation with Cambridge International Examinations, International General Certificate of Secondary Education. And I did so because I wanted credible benchmarking within my school. These are examinations which are administered by Cambridge and which are then taken away and marked externally. And we do that in my school in modern languages, mathematics, English, and science. In particular, within the science curriculum, I noticed many of the things that have been discussed today. The difference between the international science curriculum, which was very content-based, scientific method, questioning, and the Swedish national curriculum, which was not of that sort, matching the national test type questions of where one of my science teachers who comes from outside of Sweden, English trained, he felt that many of the questions in the science national test really belonged in a social studies paper as opposed to a science paper. And so there I rest. I'm very happy to answer any questions if there's anything related to this. There is a great deal to be said around these issues, and I, as I say, recognize many of the things that have been mentioned today from my own direct experiences from within these different educational systems. Thank you.
Good. Would you say then that it's possible for you as a free school in Sweden to come somewhat closer to what Dan is asking for in the way you organize the training also, or are you controlled by the curricula?
Well, of course we follow the Swedish national, it's called styrdokument in Swedish, which gives an indication of the intention. Half of our teachers are not from Sweden. They're from Canada, the United States, England, Ireland, South Africa, Australia. And of course, they bring an international think into the discussion. So there is this critical discussion about, what is the intention of these questions? Why are they asking these things? Where is the scientific method? Where is this? Where is that? And in mathematics, numeracy, word problems, about environment, yes. However, basic numeracy, where is that within the national curriculum and things like that? And of course, they bring that from outside. So we have an advantage in that way.
But what is the reaction then from the controlling agencies? Do they agree with that you are working in that line, or do you get criticized for doing that? Or
we are viewed with a certain level, I believe, of concern. At the same time as our outcomes are those that the Swedish governing body say that they want. In my school, we are not a selective school. We have 60 nationalities and cultures in my school. For the last 4 years, 100% of the students have been had a matriculation to go to gymnasium. A Meritvärde average is somewhere between 260, 265, and the boys perform at approximately the same level as the girls in academic subjects. This is not the case in many of the schools with which we are compared.
But listening to you then, you seem, all the three of you, to share these worries about the Swedish school system and what the kids actually learn. That is partly different, I think, from the general discussion on the Swedish school system. What is the content or the specificities of the Swedish school system that we learn the kids to be independent, to question things, not to believe in authorities, do you say so? Auktoriteter, that they search for the knowledge themselves, they work in project teams and so on. And in some way this seems to be very different from what you say. You speak about a fairly authoritarian, very controlled system with groupthink, and that you are supposed to answer the questions in the right way, more or less, not to search for knowledge. So there seems to be two fairly different views on the school system. Or is it just that the other guys are trying to sell their view, which is wrong, or?
I'd say that there is a problem with the Swedish school system, and I want to go back to the 50s and 60s, and it is that knowledge is not emphasized. What is emphasized is growing up together, seeing all kinds of people, getting along with other people, and the importance of group work is quite obviously a way of making the teacher less important in the classroom. And also the word inclusion, that all kinds of students with all kinds of levels of attainment should study together. This keeps the teacher so busy trying to manage the classroom that there can be rather little teaching. This is so.
Perhaps Dan, you should comment, if you have any comments, to the comments.
I don't know much at all about the Swedish school system compared to you guys, and I really can't answer. My impression is that there's both of the sorts of concerns that you're pointing out, that just in terms of learning the 3 R's, as they say in English, reading, writing, and arithmetic, it's not doing so hot, PISA and all that, but also the concern that they're promoting a point of view, and in some ways enforcing that. So it seems like there's both going on. Yeah, I do think that we should think for the second problem of what, learning a point of view, a kind of political outlook. I think we should be real clear about that and concerned about that. And we should look for somehow, even if it's just as parents, exposing our kids to other outlooks, other stories about, how countries got rich, about why life is so different today than it was in 1750 throughout the world, everywhere in the world, how that happened, what was it that the great enrichment, as it's called, 10,000 years ago, like this is like wealth per person, and then in around 1750, 1800, whoosh, the blade of the hockey stick. So why are we so rich? Well, my short answer is basically the discovery of liberalism in the liberal era, where the idea of pursuing honest income was approved of, morally authorized by people like Adam Smith. And so people realized that they could do, they certainly shouldn't be ashamed of earning honest income, and in a way it was even praiseworthy to earn honest income. So there was an honoring of entrepreneurship, of enterprise, because in fact, the way you earn honest income is by selling stuff to people who pay you their money because you render services to them, to society. And this new outlook and policy changes and institutional changes that went with this outlook, brought us the great enrichment. And this is the kind of thing that students, I don't think, have any clue about. Mm-hmm. So they need to hear the other story, that governmentalization of social affairs has big problems. It has big problems with those knowledge problems, incentive problems, and so on. And there's a whole line of thinking and philosophy that is an alternative to the attitudes and postures of the left, and students don't know that, and they need to know just that, I think.
One comment, when you had went through the curricula and looking to the words used, that I think liberalism was used in the age of liberty, and it's interesting when you read about 18th century Swedish history. My view more and more is that wasn't at all about liberty. It was about democratic despotism, more or less, something like the Social Democrats in the 1960s and 70s. It's a bad example, really. It's not liberty. That's interesting per se, that the self-perception that we have in Sweden is that there is a glorious liberal era in the 18th century, which perhaps is not at all. Perhaps it's the kings that stood for liberalism and free markets more than the parliament. So I think we have a number of difficulties in Sweden in relation to the liberalism word and liberty word.
But you had a good age of liberalism later.
Later on, yes, in
Yeah.
the 19th century, yes, that's
Yeah.
true.
Early 20th century.
Yes, that's true. Okay, now at this stage, I think we should open up for questions, and I think we have a mic there to be used, and we have a first question here. Perhaps you can present yourself, and then...
My name is Nils Ire, and I'm here in the capacity of parent and grandparent. Frankly, I don't understand all your worries, because it's much worse than all your, minor worries. I mean, all this, to me, is a very successful result for decades of implementing what you say leftist or social democratic ideology. This is an ideology question, and ideologies are very strong, and this is what all this is about. And that's why the schools look like they look. And this also goes partly for universities, and partly, in my experience, for some research. And this in its turn, that's why this is so successful for leftist people, goes hand in hand with which I will call our Swedish national character, which differs in some respects from other people's. That is our liking of consensus, which means everybody's responsibility, nobody's responsibility. And conflict afraidness. We are scared of conflicts. So I don't understand your worries. Looking at ideologically, which it is, it's a successful story for the social democratic movement. So this is a political question, nothing else. It makes this much more worried than what you three people are saying.
Comments?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that if the Swedish educational system was considered by all parts, both internal and external, as well functioning, I would agree with you. But we have a cause and effect, and in schools at the moment there are children who are suffering, I believe, because of the political ideologies of people who are unable to reconsider their very staid positions. And every day we have children who are, I believe, underachieving within schools because there's been, to a certain extent, an abdication of adult responsibility, which needs to be reassumed. And this needs to be done with leadership, starting right at the top and leading all the way through the organization. And so, yes, I agree with you in principle, but in practice, which is what I deal with making sure that students, when they're 16, have the tools and the skills and the abilities they need to go on with their lives and to be successful, happy, balanced, productive, and successful members of society. And I honestly don't see that just at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
More comments?
I would say that this policy has been very successful in the, and I think I understand what you mean here, because both the Social Democrats and also what was for a long time called the opposition, both accepted this kind of policy, and the Liberal Party and the right-wing party, they often voted for these reforms. So the Social Democrats got a kind of consensus about this kind of policy. And I'd say that it's after the year 2000 and the PISA results that it's really possible to show something concrete and say, well, this is the result. This is not just an attitude from some people. These are facts. But there is a resistance within the the political parties, with Skolverket, etc., the departments of pedagogy, to accept these results. And as you all know here, they have responded questioning the PISA informs and how these reports are made. So I think that the people who decide on pedagogy in Sweden, they have not really started to reconsider. They are in a phase, I'd say, of denial and of trying to maintain their position, and very little has been done. Even after the OECD report, which is terrible for Sweden. It is terrible. And if you have an hour of free time, look it up on YouTube. The presentation a year ago of the PISA representatives, Andreas Schleicher and company, for Skolverkets chef, Anna Ekström, and for our minister, Fridolin. They point after point after point, they said that Swedish school system does not work well. And you saw the ministers, they reacted.
But he's a teacher, isn't he?
He is.
Yes.
Well, he was trained
He's
for
trained
a
as
short
a
time.
teacher.
And you see their bodies react to what they hear, but they do not know what to say. So they say, "Oh, thank you for this observation," because they have no words to explain what they would need to say.
Okay, more questions from the audience? There's a question there.
Yes, my name is Yvonne Rosenthal.
The other one.
So,
Other way. No.
so, this way.
Other way around. Micken upp.
Then, so.
So.
I'm a psychologist involved in research, qualitative research, and I want to continue what you are talking about. What did the now opposition, that's the Alliansen, actually do?
Yeah.
I was very disappointed,
Yes.
grossly, but I think, what do you think? Did they achieve anything?
Yes, I think they did, but less than one would have hoped. And I think that's merely an opinion. I think that they did not understand the importance of teacher training and ideology. They tried to change part of the organization, but they did not really touch on the content. So there's a lot to do.
Yes, I suppose it's hearts and minds, really. Have the politicians been able to convince those people who they then charge with implementing policy changes that this is the right direction to go, and get everybody on board to do it? My experiences with the expert group recently would indicate to me that this is not the case.
A relevant question, of course, can be, what should you do then? If you are a liberal and you are concerned, like Dan is, what is the way forward? What should we do? You are pointing at perhaps institutional reform, opening up for more alternatives, decentralization, decontrolization of the system, more or less. And then we are back more or less to the question, do we need a strong liberal to decide that we have to change the system? We need a Thatcher in the Swedish school system, or how can it be changed? You have the solution, that's good.
Well, I would like just to put in another observation, which is that when evaluating schools in the United Kingdom, I've been involved in helping one of our schools there deal with an organization called Ofsted, which is an inspection, a very rigorous inspection organization that inspects schools in the United Kingdom. And their major focus is what is happening in the classrooms, the interaction between the teacher and the student. Are learning environments being created? Is there evidence of real learning taking place in every classroom, every lesson, in every school in the country? And the school is evaluated with that as a starting point. the inspection, my experience of the Swedish inspection process is that they don't go into the classrooms at all, by design. When questioned about that by me, they said that they had neither the background nor the training, and had discussed this centrally and felt that it was not their part to go into the classrooms and observe and advise about what the teacher should be doing in direct contact with the students. That is a massive difference in terms of looking for systematic school improvement. For me, when I need to try to work out what's happening in my school, I go into the classrooms, and that tells me immediately whether or not we have a quality school or not. By looking at the styrdokument, whether or not we have our åtgärdsprogram in order, that for me is not the center, the nucleus of that which needs to be in place to have a high quality school. So my first thing would be, and that would be a suggestion to Verket and Skolinspektionen, is to look at how we can begin a systematic school improvement program that involves looking at what's actually going on in the classrooms, as is the case in most, I believe, other successful educational systems around the world.
Inger, what would you?
I would
Your
say-
proposals for improvement.
Yes. On three levels. First, I think that we have a very expensive school system. There's a lot of money in the system.
Well, even though they actually use it just as much as actors, even more maybe.
Yeah.
So I want to go out there, and they don't want me there. They don't want to, they're not interested.
Well, I perceive, of course, that someone who themselves doesn't feel that they are doing a particularly good job would be rather sensitive to someone coming in and seeing that. Professor Todd Whitaker from the United States, he lectures to school districts and principals about these kinds of things. And he says often that when someone isn't doing what you want them to do, the first thing you must assume is that they don't know what to do. And you must help them and tell them what it is that they need to do. They need a framework within which to work. And if it isn't working, then someone, an expert in the field, should be able to assist that person that wants to do a good job with some specific concrete things that they can do to make them more like the best teachers within the school, because there are people in the school who are working extremely well. The children love them. They do fantastic things in the classrooms, and everybody's on board. And yet they're working with the same children. And therefore, I honestly believe that when we begin coaching and assisting our people in the classrooms with what they need to do to become more like that teacher that always has the best class, for some reason, for 20 years, then I believe that we'll be able to start getting somewhere. And it is literally getting to the coalface and looking at what's actually happening in the classrooms. That's the key.
Okay.
Final comment?
Yeah, final comment, please.
Yeah, so what to do, there's all these levels of national policy down to the teachers' programs, the level of the schoolmaster, which Robert speaks from, down to the teacher, to the parent. All these decision makers, what to do. I just want to say, at the very top level, I mean, we live in an age of mass democracy, and I don't think Margaret Thatcher is going to ride in on a white horse anytime soon. And we are stuck with the median voter, the average voter. And the average voter in politics perhaps isn't very satisfying to each one of us, not very satisfying to me. I won't speak of the American process right now, the American election. But, that's in the median voters talking and deciding policy. When it comes to the median voter deciding, their kids' piano lessons and their haircuts and their grocery shopping, I trust the median voter. And that's what we have to put more faith in when we think about what national policy should be. It should be more faith in this bottom-up competitive process of private ownership, preferably, because that has good incentives and good knowledge properties. And apart from affecting what goes on at the national level, again, I just want to reiterate that even now, with what it is, parents can do things as parents in their own home. And that's, I think, an important thing to think about.
Okay, I think it's time to round off. Thank you very much for coming here, Dan, to illuminate us. And I think this could be the start of a continuous process. These are really important questions to discuss. And from a liberal point of view, of course, for Timbro, it's important to have a living discussion on these questions. So thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, Inger. Thank you, Robert, for commenting. Thank you, the audience. And let's give a hand.